давление сустава.
Ух ты, как я попал-то.
Piano Week recital tonight, which is going to be a fusion between classical and jazz. Tonight's concert is brought to you by Piano Week, Pianist Magazine, Morton Hall, Rugby School Enterprises and the Holroyd Theatre. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. And in the meantime, we really hope you enjoyed tonight's recital.
Опять что ли? А, это просто запись. У нее это еще одни что ли? Или они переименовали уже ее? Я не понимаю. Что здесь?
Is called Spectrum by Japanese pianist and composer Hiromi Uehara, one of my favorite jazz pianists of our time. I wanted to open the concert with something punchy and strong to warm us up in this cold weather. The next music will take you into totally different mood.
А, меня это не касается, просто, понимаешь, это потом не спрашивай меня, это ответ всегда один будет. Да. Что, да. Ну, понимает он себя. Это их проблема, как бы, это меня не касается. Это меня не волнует это. Ну да, типа того. Прикинь, не знаю, не понял. Меня это не касается. Я просто тебе объясняю, что вот так вот. Все остальное, да. Вот так вот они свою жизнь живут, ну что, все формы феминизма, чего угодно. Ну я тебе просто объясняю, что женщина не беременная, понимаешь? Как вот объяснишь? Меня это не касается, это долго просто. Это их проблема, понимаешь? Это их, еще раз я тебе повторяю, да? Такого нет, это не так. То есть нету таких исходов, когда женщина делает что-то мужское, это польза будет обществу, понимаешь? Это их проблема. Ну живи так, пожалуйста, это твоя проблема, то есть твое право. Я тебе просто сказал, ты меня услышал, если то услышал, если нет, то нет. И нет такой правды, которую ты говоришь, что надо сокращать, ты вот то, что ты говорил, да, что так вот распоряжается. Никто так не распоряжается, это просто ты, да, то есть типа ты меня понимаешь. Можешь так сказать, скажи, боже, если это ты говоришь, там говорил, да? Жизнь внутри меня, понимаешь, вот та волосок, та линия просто, которая продолжается от моих предков, она продолжается не в форме гермафродита, она в форме мужика гея, например. Но ты мужик со спермой, с яйцами, хочешь докажу. Вот, да, то есть все, у тебя нет опций, такой же мужчина, да. Все остальное психиатрия. Да. И я тебе точно говорю, нет, ты естественно гея спросишь, он тебе скажет, нет, это хорошо быть геем, бля. Это как, ну понимаю, да. То есть, ну когда ты, да. Ты понимаешь, то есть опций таких нету, понимаешь, да. Все равно ты мужчина, и на самом деле ты просто не ценишь, да, не знаешь, что такое. Ну, он тебя понял, да. Ну нет, он тебе про себя так говорил, да. Ну да. Ну, да. Вот это в смысле, да. Ну да. Нет. Мне вообще похуй, ну, понимаешь, мне это не касается таких проблем. Ну да. Вот типа того, меня, понимаешь. Ты же мужик, правильно? Как оно на самом деле? Вот и все, да. Ну, меня это не касается, загнуться, не загнуться. То есть, как бы, здесь как бы есть большой зазор здоровья, который ты можешь расходовать, типа того. Да, ну, типа, понял меня, да. Ну, да. Ну, 3% там, что. Меня не касается, это все долгая дорога, но она, да. Зачем нам нужен феминизм? Зачем? Что женщине нужна свобода, им надо работать, там, свобода для чего? О чем они говорят? Что их там, да, то есть они не хотят быть женщинами, на самом деле, что им слабо быть мужчиной, да, просто, да, просто порок этого рода, понимаешь, да. Вот ты это не выковыришь, понимаешь? То есть, да, ну вот видишь, то есть все люди, не все, то есть, да, лучше меня знают все ответы. Я тебе просто говорю, вот, ну да, ну то есть ты женщина и все, и точка. Тебя ебут, и ты здоровая. Как бы, тебя хотят, имеют и как бы уважают, и поэтому в правильное отверстие имеют. Как бы, да. И если сначала неправильно, а потом правильно, потому что, как бы, да, не знаю, по таинствам каких-то, да, понимаете. Ну да. А все, это весь процесс, то есть, ну, я не понимаю, ну, наоборот, оно остается. Какой еще преисподней, причем, да. Ну, вот это имеется в виду, что это все похуй. Че? Ну, как бы, это твое дело, понимаешь, то есть, да. То есть, ну, нет, это дело не в том даже, что, я тебя понял, это по-своему просто говорю. Вызревают души человеческие, вот там, типа того, то есть, что за интересность, и это тоже неправда, понимаешь? Да. То есть, ну и это тоже как-то, ну пусть даже так, но как-то тоже, это тоже все временное, понимаешь? Просто, да. Да, типа того, да. Ну, может и так, как-то, да. Ну, верно, да. Поэтому просто можешь особо, ну ладно, это тоже, меня это не касается, да, долго слишком. Да. Все это слишком долго. Да.
Very warm and lyrical. And that is two pieces from Songs Without Words by Mendelssohn. The first piece is Opus 38, number 6, called Duet. When I first heard this piece, I totally fell in love with it. It is literally a song without words. It is very expressive. There are two main voices, the soprano voice answered by a tenor, and after exchanging softwares, they join voices to sing the songs in octaves. It is a perfect representation of love. In fact, Mendelssohn gave this piece to his bride as a wedding gift. This follows by another beautiful work, the wandering and nostalgic Opus 67 number 2.
А почему у Фанни Мендельсон-то написано? Ну как-то я не знаю, не, я не такой, я просто. Ну нет, вот это есть. Ну сам, да. Нет, ну просто что-то пропустил, значит. Сейчас, значит, типа того что-то открыли, что, оказывается, Мендельсон ничего не написал, все написал его, это, скажем, да. Нет, уж нет. Понятно. А, ну просто я тут это. Ну это же дуэт, это точно помню, может даже. Да. Дуэт и что-то тут еще было написано. Опус 38, это явно не это самое. Ну это не Фанни Мендельсон ведь написала, да? А, или может это что-то новое? Не, не собираюсь вот это. Ну нет, наоборот, типа того. А, ну нет, я оскорблен просто. Оскорблен, да. Ну да, наверное, есть что-то, да. А, ну да, да, ну есть такой, да. Вообще, да. Слушай, реально, да. Ну ладно. Ну это и есть она самая, да. А, ну хорошо. Это уже круто, да. Так и написано ведь. Фанни Мендельсон написано. Опус 38. А почему Фанни Мендельсон? А, просто потому что она ей посвятила, то есть она как бы, то есть авторское право ее как бы, он это имеет в виду. Как интересно. Так это, да. Ну, наверное, нет, наверное, да, вот это есть. А просто это. Да. Ну нет, это просто, как это сказать, ну а чё подцепился-то? Это как, понимаешь, ты такой открываешь прелюдии Баха, а там написано, как бы это, племянница Баха, например, то есть в 21 веке там везде, племянница Баха там какой-нибудь, еще какая-нибудь, ну там подворотня шлюха, которую он переспал, не знаю, к примеру, это ты уже просто смеялся так. Нет, я просто, не издеваюсь, я просто, не в этом суть, просто... Ну, как бы, я не в курсе этого, это как бы, что-то новое произошло, значит. Что значит, Мендельсон не писал свои произведения, это не Феликс Мендельсон, а все это написал, я где-то это слышал краем уха. Вот я сейчас смотрю видео, и там написано Фанни Мендельсон. Песня без слов, которые все подписывают, как это самое, да. Нигде не написано, что это Фанни Мендельсон, и она тоже этого не сказала. Она сказала, что они как бы как подарок преподнесены, как бы это самое, да. Это же не значит, что она понимает она себя, да. Ну это просто, ну это специально, то есть она, то есть это все равно Феликс Мендельсон написал, он это, ну то есть как бы это тогда надо всем надо переименовать, Рахманинов кому-то посвящал там концерт там и так далее, надо все переименовать тогда, просто, да, просто, наверное, если я под хвост, ну я понял, ну да, типа, ошалевший феминизм, но это популярно, из-за этого дают деньги, видимо, да, может быть, какие-то, наверное, и меня это не касается, а просто так вот. Я не узнал, я не столько хорошо знаю песни, к сожалению. Вроде она красивее. Нет, есть такое, но те, которые так. Я не уверен. Я не понимаю. Вроде все совпадает. Там то же самое, опус 38 написано. И опять смотри, опус 38, то есть выходит, Фанни Мендельсон написала 38 опусов. То, что я видел, у нее там где-то опус 8, что-то такое, да, то есть она тебя понимает. То есть, вот это специально делается просто, понимаешь? Нет, это я не в обиду говорю, вот в Википедии написано Фанни Мендельсон. Опус 67, песня без слов, опус 67. А, вот так вот, нет, это, вписка просто такая. Типа, ну да. Ну нет, это тебе зачем это писать, если это сделал Феликс Мендельсон, то есть это авторство. То есть авторство реально Фанни Мендельсон, просто так тогда опус ее поставь. Ну нет, она понимает себя, так нет. Ты видишь, у тебя что-то непорядки, то есть они, ну представляешь, какая она свирепая, то есть насколько она ненавидит русский язык, ну я понял, да. Ну я просто так уже это, я понял, ну нет, вот это имеется в виду, да. Что за слова такие? Просто они о себе так говорят просто, да. Нет. Вот это и есть оно самое. Ну нет. Нет, ты что, тупой не понимаешь, что ли? Я просто, да. Ну ты идиот, вот ты сейчас открываешь учебник, там, да, ну он тебя понял, ну вот это и есть оно самое. Ладно. Ну я не в курсе, я понимаю, я не в курсе. Да, произведение. Давай, по-русски. Что там, времена года? Понятно. Упс. тогда это важно? А почему нет? То есть это все не датировано, поэтому. Ну нет, наоборот. Сочинение 8. Что это такое? Соврал, заблудился, видела, нет? Слушай, так ничего нету, оказывается, да. Опус 8.4. Я не в курсе, значит, просто этого. Ну, не, да, значит, продвинулся за несколько лет уже, да, наоборот. Нет, надо, да, вот это. Меня это не касается, тут ничего говорить даже не буду. Ваши проблемы, не, сами разбирайтесь. Смейтесь, понимаете. Вот я понимаю, тоже тебя понял. Ну, не совсем, но близко. Ну, нет, а как тебе надо? Что тебе надо? Ну, да. Возможно, даже так. Ну, я вот, да, не то, что соврал. Ну смотри, как бы все, допустим, все это все знают, но тебе никто ничего не говорит, и как бы никто не хочет неприятности, поэтому все молчат, например, или разные варианты. Все знают, но молчат, понимаешь? Ну вот, да, тем более, хер вам всем в рот, сука, ненавижу, блядь, что. Нет, ну, к смерти твои хотят, поэтому все и молчат, блин, да. То есть им всем хера не на тебя клали, поэтому они все и молчат, да. Да, если вот он тебя понял, да. У тебя, ну а ты как думал? Да. Да. Видимо, нам, да. Все равно, да. Ладно. Я не понял. Нет. Это вряд ли, наверное, да. Свежее. Ну, значит, я этого просто не знаю. Наоборот, не где. Преднамеренно просто так написала. Наоборот. Ну, как бы это... Ну, ладно, меня не волнует это просто. Нет. Ну нет, ну хорошо, ладно, продолжай что-то доказывать. Да, это долго просто.
Все, что у меня есть для тебя, слово.
Не, я бы поиграл с удовольствием. Ну, не сейчас. Не стал бы играть, нет, конечно. Не, я давно уже говорю. Ну и что дальше? Мне наплевать. Да. Ну, не знаю, деньги зарабатывал для семьи, еще что-нибудь там. Откуда я знаю? Что ты меня спрашиваешь? Это все не важно. Важно, что она не беременная, значит, была. Значит, злюка была. А мне похер. Этот мир может всех применить, все переживать, да. Не проблем. Да. Я понял. Не в этом дело, я не знаю. Ну, да, геноцид. Ну нет, ну да, это твои проблемы, да. Чей же геноцид? Он тебе говорил так, да нет, наоборот. А, одеваться некуда, это он на себе так говорит. Да. Нет, тут нечего даже, да. Нет, нельзя, ну нет, нельзя. Ну да. Нет, тут как бы объем работы, либо сдача по того. Ну, доброта, как-то так. Что такое доброта, мы не знаем, мы мужчины, потому что, да. Наверное, это даже не про знание, может и так даже, да. То есть, ну, понимаете, ну, и чё? Что ты хочешь сказать, да, то есть нету никаких промежутков. Если был бы какой-то промежуток, у тебя было бы одно яйцо тогда. И половина матки, да. Ну, как бы и одна матка там, или что-то там сказала, да, не касается это, да. Надо понимать. Да, вот это есть. Ну, народ просто, ну, да. Ну, да. То есть, ну, да, как твою жизнь жить дальше, да. А ты что, да. То есть, это все фигня, я тебе просто объясняю, как все, дальше некуда уже, да. Да, да, как бы, ну, мне не касается, вот я понял, надоело уже просто. Тебе про тебя рассказывают просто, вот я понял, знает он. Ну, значит, все.
It is a set of 3.
Music lovers called prime phonics. So why is this different? Well,
most of you probably know this. This is the Ode to Joy from the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It was begun in 1822 and completed in 1824 when Beethoven was 54 years old. This particular symphony, music critics and musicologists consider to be Beethoven's greatest work and one of the supreme achievements in the history of music. And I agree. It's hard to believe that someone could write something this beautiful. What's even harder to believe is that he wrote it when he was completely deaf. I've always wondered not only how someone could write a piece like this vast, this beautiful, when they're deaf, but also why. How do we even know about Beethoven's hearing loss or deafness? He wrote a letter in 1802 called the Heiligenstadt Testament to his two brothers, Karl and Johann, that wasn't discovered until after Beethoven's death in 1827. Let me read you a bit from that. From childhood on, my heart and soul have been full of the tender feeling of goodwill, and I was even inclined to accomplish great things. But to think that for 6 years now, I've been hopelessly afflicted, made worse by senseless physicians, from year to year deceived with hopes of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady. Though born with a fiery, active temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I was soon compelled to isolate myself, to live alone. If at times I tried to forget all this, oh how harshly I was flung back by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. Yet it was impossible for me to say to people, "Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." How could I possibly admit an infirmity in the one sense which ought to be more perfect in me than others? A sense which I once possessed in the highest perfection, a perfection such as few in my profession enjoy or have ever enjoyed. Then he goes,
Breakfast. Так.
Goes on to say, but what a humiliation for me when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing. Or someone standing next to me heard a shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents drove me almost to despair. And a little more of that and I would have ended my life. In 1802, Beethoven was 32 years old, so 6 years earlier at age 26, he began to lose his hearing. So what did Beethoven mean when he said, a sense that I once possessed in the highest perfection, a perfection such as few in my profession enjoy or have ever enjoyed? He's talking about having perfect pitch. The only way that Beethoven could have written music while he was deaf is if he had perfect pitch. Now, what is perfect pitch? Perfect pitch is the ability to hear a note without a reference tone and know what it is. It's also the ability to imagine in your mind a note or a series of notes or even an entire orchestral score and know what it sounds like. If any of you have ever seen the movie Amadeus that came out in 1984, there's a scene near the end where the Mozart character is really ill, he's in bed, and he's imagining his requiem. As he's imagining it, he's telling Salieri, the other character, what pitches to write.
Second beat of the fourth measure, on F. Now the orchestra. Second bassoon and bass trombones with the bass.
That is a great demonstration of what perfect pitch is. And this is something that Beethoven had to the highest degree. When I say the highest degree, I'm not sure that there's anyone that has had a musical imagination or perfect pitch to the level of Beethoven. Just think of him imagining this. So, in complete silence, you have to imagine the entire orchestration of every single part just by looking at the page. When Beethoven began to lose his hearing, it started from the top down, meaning the higher frequencies began to disappear first. If you think of the highest note of the piano, C8, that is 4186 hertz, or roughly 4.2 K. Now, human beings can hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz, okay? This is 4186 hertz. So to begin to lose your hearing at the top end, I mean, typically people, when they get in their late 50s like myself, their hearing will go down to probably about 13K, right? So you don't really hear things that well above that. It's just gone. That's from living long enough. Beethoven died at 56, okay? So in his mid-20s, his hearing was probably like that of someone that is 80 years old. If you're having trouble hearing the highest notes of the piano, that is very profound hearing loss. Let me give you an example of what that might sound like if Beethoven was hearing one of his own pieces. To try to approximate what Beethoven's hearing loss would be, what you need to do is know what range is affected by the articulation of speech. Typically, people that have a deficiency between 2 and 4K will have trouble hearing someone speaking to them because the articulation of speech is between that frequency range. I'm going to use an EQ in Pro Tools to filter out the top end to try and approximate what Beethoven's hearing would be like, especially if we get lower than the frequency of hearing intelligibility. Let's go over to the computer. Okay. Starting to have it really affected there when I get down to about 2K. I just brought the low pass filter down to 1.3K. Let's try and do it a little bit more dramatically and see what happens. And then in. Let's make it even more severe. Okay, let's do it without it. And then. Let's do it even more, make it more severe. In addition to high frequency hearing loss, Beethoven also suffered from tinnitus, or tinnitus as some people say. Now, I'm very familiar with it because I have tinnitus. Let me give you an example of what my tinnitus sounds like right now. Now, turn your monitors down, your volume down. I'm just going to play 2 seconds of the sound just to give you a feel for what it sounds like. Here it is. I don't have it every day, but when I do have it, like right now, it's incredibly loud, and it's hard to imagine doing anything with music if you have it all the time. Let me give you an example of what this frequency loss and tinnitus together would sound like to Beethoven. How do you even think of music in your head to write when you're hearing that sound? So this is Beethoven as if he's hearing an orchestra play his Third Symphony with his hearing diminished and with his ears ringing. Then think about being alone while you're writing this music and you're pounding it onto the piano and you have that constant ringing going on. So one of the things about Beethoven's writing is that during this period,
Понимаешь? Это вот, да, я не знаю, я вот, понимаешь, женское вот любите, представляешь, как это уродливо, насколько это безобразно. Да? Мне даже слов не помогает. Отвратительно, да. Это просто детское заболевание, это болезнь детства. Да, да, спать какал. Да, что-то это говорил. Ну нет, по-моему, он так вот. Ну, тебе он так вот говорит.
As he began to lose his hearing in the high frequencies, he had all these different devices that he would use, putting a pencil in his teeth and putting it on the soundboard, or putting his head down on the piano. They have talked about him sawing the legs off his piano, putting it on the floor to use the floor as a sounding board. There's all these different things that he would do and play very loudly. But his writing then started to get into a lower and lower ranges, and you can hear that during certain periods. If you think of the Moonlight Sonata that I played earlier, that's in a very low register. And that's most likely because of him losing his hearing. So he's not writing up in that high register. Because he can't hear in that high register. Well, then a thing happened. Eventually, around 1816 or so, or maybe a little bit later, he went completely deaf. And then his writing actually opened up to where he was imagining everything in his head. But he's even hearing that ringing going on as he's trying to imagine, like we just saw the Mozart character imagining music. Beethoven's imagining that music while that ringing is going on as well. I can't even fathom that. And then to think of the entire Ninth Symphony, or the late
Hey there, this is Ryan from TakeLessons.com. Today I'm going to be talking about some piano finger exercises to increase your speed. The first thing I want to talk about is being aware of your thumbs and what they're doing, and specifically what they're doing in scales. And I think this is really important in building your speed up. So let's dive right in. Let's say that we have a D major kind of pattern. So our D major scale, we have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, right? Okay, so one thing that you may notice, when you're playing any ascending scale with your right hand, if it's more than a 5-finger scale, you're going to have to cross over to your thumb at some point. I apologize if this is review for most of you, it probably will be. However, what I do want to talk about is being aware of what your thumb is doing after you play it. So even what I'm doing right now, you notice that my thumb is going up the keys and is preparing for the next note that it's going to play, which is G in this case, right? What I often find my beginner students doing is, rather than preparing their thumbs or the next fingers that they need, they'll instead kind of stay in the key and then awkwardly realize, oh, I have to switch. And so you get this kind of sound. Those of you who teach will immediately recognize that sound as one that you're trying to work out of your students' scales. And it's actually not that hard to get out of their scales. So here's what I would suggest. Earlier you saw me doing this pattern where I am simply playing my thumb and index finger and then preparing my thumb on the next note. And this is just the exercise that I want to talk about, in fact. It's quite self-explanatory, and all you really need to do is play your thumb, play the next note of your scale, and then immediately as you play that next note, moving up moving up the piano. It shouldn't really be bent like mine is, but it's just based on the direction I'm sitting. I can't change that. But it should just be moving straight up the keys in a horizontal fashion. So the rest shouldn't be.
Can 7/7 flat 9 sharp 9 resolve to 1 major 7? Okay, let's break this down, because even 7/7 flat 9 sharp 9 resolve to 1 major 7. Okay, let's break this down, because even though this looks complicated, the chords when they are played next to one another actually don't sound that complicated. And what this actually reminds me of is how Oscar Peterson reharmonizes the jazz standard Misty. Check this out. It's such a hazy chord, like it's shrouded in a veil. It is a misty chord. I love this reharmonization.
Play Misty for me.
What's going on is he's playing a D major triad on top of an E flat in the bass. Normally the first chord on Misty is just a regular E flat major. Major 7, the 1 chord, the home. But he sneaks in this reharmonization, this D chord. Now, if you're thinking about it in relationship to the 7/7 flat 9 sharp 9, this D triad on top of the E flat in the bass is the 7 in the key of E flat. If we were to play that 7 major chord and then add the dominant 7th to make it a 7/7, and then add the sharp 9 to make it a 7 sharp 9, that E flat in the bass would be the flat 9 of this 7/7 flat 9 sharp 9. Now in context, this chord sounds absolutely beautiful to me. It also kind of reminds me of a 1 diminished chord, a diminished 7th chord built on the root, resolving to a 1 chord. Both, I think, are acceptable ways of thinking about it, but to answer the question, yes, it can resolve to the 1 major 7. It sounds really nice. Are tuplets and polyrhythms just gimmicks? Well, if you've been watching my channel for the past couple years, you might get that impression from ridiculous things like this 7/11 polyrhythm challenge, but no. Tuplets and polyrhythms are not just gimmicks. They, in fact, form an integral part of many styles of music from across the world. You'll find all kinds of polyrhythms like 3/2 and 3/4. In Western art music, for example, you have things like Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu, which has a very rich 3/4 texture. A very different, but also equally as exciting and musically rich polyrhythmic effect can be found in Afro-Cuban music, like the music of the elite congueros, like Pedrito Martinez, for example. Another very different use of polyrhythm, but also one that is extremely necessary for the musical expression, can be found in the music of Meshuggah, like, of course, the insane polyrhythmic double kick of Bleed. For me, multiple strains of musical rhythms occurring at the same time and in relationship to one another creates this inherent push and pull tension that is just so invigorating. It's like kind of at the essence of what the music is just all about in the first place. So no, I don't think that polyrhythms are gimmicks at all. If we can have more than 12 notes, can we have less than 12? Sure, I've heard that called macrotonal music as opposed to microtonal music. If you have a VST like Piano Tech, you can basically just type in whatever division of the octave you'd like. So instead of 12 tones per octave, we could have like 5 tones per octave, and that would retune my piano to give us this kind of strange pentatonic sounding scale. Sounds pretty cool to me. It's like a pentatonic scale that's neither minor or major. You can also retune the piano to divide the octave into 7 evenly spaced notes, so it gives you this kind of scale which kind of sounds like the major scale, but not really. Apparently, some people think that traditional Thai music might relate in some way to the 7-tone equal temperament, but I think it's possible and very cool to have macrotonal music. Maybe experiment with it. I don't know. Opinions on clowncore. They are absolutely disgusting. Why is a quintuplet swing accented? They are absolutely disgusting. Why is a They are absolutely disgusting. Why is a quintuplet swing accented on 1 in 4 and not 1 in 5? Asking for a friend. Well, one way of thinking of this is thinking in terms of what's called swing percentages, which is a term that's adopted from a workflow from old school MPC machines. If you have regular evenly spaced eighth notes, you would say that there is a 50% swing because the first of the 2 eighth notes takes up 50% of the beat. It is 50% of the 2 eighth notes takes up 50% of the beat. It is 50% swing.
That's 50%.
If you have kind of a generic triplet swing, you would if you have regular evenly spaced eighth notes, you would say that there is a 50% swing because the first of the 2 eighth notes takes up 50% of the beat. It is 50% swing.
That's 50%.
If you have kind of a generic triplet swing, you would say that there is a 66% swing applied to the rhythm because the first of the 2 eighth notes in this triplet swing takes up 66% of the beat in terms of time elapsed. The first eighth note takes up significantly more time than the second eighth note.
If you have like a 66% swing percentage, it's like...
If you had what we would typically call quintuplet swing, where the first of the eighth notes takes the span of 3 quintuplets as opposed to the second of the eighth notes 2 quintuplets, we say that that has a 60% swing. So it takes up 60% of the beat. Now, there are many other gradations of swing with the swing percentage that you could think about. For example, the thing that you're talking about, where there's the accent on the first quintuplet and then the 5th quintuplet, you would think of as 80% swing. The first eighth note takes up 80% of the beat when compared to the second eighth note in an eighth note swing pattern. It has a very kind of choppy feel to it. I think the term that some drummers use is that it's overswung.
And then you can get like 80%. And like that steepness of swing is like super crazy. And you can experiment with how you want the groove to feel by messing with that, you know?
You could get kind of weird with it. For example, if you divided the beat into a group of 8 30-second notes and the first eighth note took the span of 5 of those 30-second notes and the second eighth note took the span of 3 of those 30-second notes, you'd have a 62.5% swing, which is kind of nice. It's like almost a triplet swing, but it's not quite as stilted as like the quintuplet swing of the 3 against 2. It's like its own thing entirely. Anyway, that's just another way of thinking about it. It's fun when you start experimenting with different swing percentages because each one of them has a very different feeling. Why are many non-classical musicians unwilling to learn to read sheet music? Well, my first impulse is to ask the smarmy response. Many non-classical musicians unwilling to learn to read sheet music. Well, my first impulse is to ask the smarmy response, which is, why are many classical musicians unwilling to learn how to improvise? There are many classical musicians that I've played with that just simply will not be able to play a note unless there is a piece of sheet music in front of them. They don't know how to connect with their instrument and improvise music from their own head and from their own hands. Now, I don't want to cast too much shade here, but the reason is because improvisation just is not required of many classical musicians, at least in the classical music scene. It's the same reason why non-classical musicians might simply not know how to read or have no interest in learning how to read. Yes, I use Western notation all the time in my videos as kind of like a visual aid, but for many styles of music, especially as you go further and further from the Western European tradition, it's just not necessary to know how to read.
Play Misty for me.
The tune Misty That jazz standard that we were talking about earlier was composed by a guy by the name of Errol Garner. And he very famously did not know how to read sheet music. Like, he would not be able to read his own tune out of the real book. And when he was criticized for this, he, possibly apocryphally, responded, "Nobody comes to watch me read." And I think that's a very important thing to emphasize.
Да, то есть, если тебе дают деньги, тебе уже все ничего не надо больше, да. Это один из вариантов просто, да. Ну нет, это, ну он тебе про себя уже говорил тогда.
When you take this view that reading sheet music is necessary for the craft and creation of music, you have a very limited view, one that is very much beholden to the harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. Are lick memes still funny? Definitely not, and they never were. But that doesn't stop me from using them. 7-tone equal tempered lick. Opinion on nail polish while playing. Definitely not harmonic style of 18th century European musicians. Are lick memes still funny? Definitely not, and they never were. But that doesn't stop me from using them. 7-tone equal tempered lick. Opinion on nail polish while playing. There's a video that I did, 7 years ago with Jay Soto called I Didn't Know, where right before going into the recording session, I painted my nails golden. And I think they look quite good, if I do say so myself. I'm new to the idea of tuplets. Why not change time sig? Example, 5/8, instead of writing tuplet. Well, it really comes down to convention, because what you're doing is you're dividing a unit of time into 5 evenly spaced groupings. And so for me, 5/8 means slower than quintuplets, but conceptually they're kind of the same. Rule of thumb that I use is that if you cannot physically get the words out of your mouth in the allotted time, then it's probably a tuplet. And if you can count out fast enough, then you can think of it as a time signature. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could be 5/8, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, probably quintuplets. How much of your furniture is from IKEA, and why is it all of it? I resent the question. But yeah, that's from IKEA. Usual bass processing plugin. How much of your furniture is from IKEA, and why is it all of it? I resent the question. But yeah, that's from IKEA. Usual bass processing plugins and outboard gear. What's your typical signal chain on the bass? So I mainly use this bad boy, the Line 6 HX Stomp, for most of my stuff these days. The advantage here is I like having the hardware, but controlling it with the computer. So I have the patches on my computer, but as you see here, when I scroll through them and double click them on the computer, they change here on the actual unit, which is useful when performing live, because in the case of laptop failure, which does happen, I've been the victim of that many times, you'll still always have the hardware unit going. I like this thing, I use it for amp emulation. All the technical failures, sweet. Now the amp that I generally use with it is the Ampeg SVT4 Pro. I have this impulse response for an Ampeg, whatever that is.
Play Misty for me.
What's the biggest reasonable time signature? Like 21/8, 23/16, etc. Well, it really kind of just depends on like the culture that you're coming from, honestly, because that does affect your idea of what reasonable is. But for my money, 21/8 is actually fairly straightforward, because you can think of it like just 2 measures of 12/8, which is a regular time signature. It's a compound 4/4 made up of 4 beats of 3 subdivisions apiece. But then in the second measure of 12/8, you remove one of those beats. So it's like 12/8 plus 9/8, kind of like a compound 7/4. Because of that, it's actually relatively straightforward to rework some tunes in 12/8 into 21/8. So this is what Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely would sound like in 21/8, I guess. wild, like deleting that beat at the end of the phrase, but that's what it would sound like in 21/8, in case you wanted to know. There we go. Is Giant Steps really all that crazy? I mean, there are plenty of harder pieces of music than Giant Steps, but you have to think about it in context. The way I like to think about it is it's the jazz version of Niccolo Paganini's 24 Caprices. These are a series of compositions composed by the Italian virtuoso violinist Niccolo Paganini that were originally written to be so difficult that he was the only person in the world who would be able to perform them. Nobody else but he could perform the Caprices because he allegedly sold his soul to the devil for his mad violin skills. The Caprices had this kind of like legendary status in terms of their technical difficulty, but nowadays there are many violinists who can play them, even though they present many, many technical challenges. And it's kind of the same thing with John Coltrane's Giant Steps. It's not the hardest piece in the world to play, but it is very difficult. It kind of sets the standard for improvisation, because if you can play it convincingly, which I can't, Lord knows, then that tells people that, hey, this person has practiced jazz. Congratulations. Traditionally, few other pieces in the jazz canon have that ability to communicate that information as directly and succinctly to other jazz musicians as whether or not you can play Giant Steps. And so because of that, traditionally, there is kind of this machismo around Giant Steps. You're kind of a dick if you call Giant Steps at a jam session because you're trying to like prove something. But, you know, it is a very, very good meme, and I very much appreciate all the Giant Steps memes that are on the internet. So if you make Giant Steps memes, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the Giant Steps.